Let's talk about inflammation and stress. You're extremely knowledgeable about this, but you also have some kind of personal warnings. My wife, Danae, same thing, where she loved hot yoga. We've been in some hot yoga together.
We have.
Where I'm dying the
wow,
whole
what
time.
an experience. I forgot about that.
When your boss comes in hot yoga.
Really.
She's like, we won't see the fallout of the kind of COVID pandemic till like 3-4 years later. And I feel like we kind of feel it right now. It just feels like people are tired, they're fatigued, they're irritable.
What I see people struggle with the most is sometimes when they start to come to the realization that like...
Welcome to the Fear No Food podcast, health and nutrition stuff for us normal people. Well, I'm super excited. Second episode of Fear No Food podcast. And I have with me here Lauren BaBastinston, who is a clinical nutritionist, holistic healthcare practitioner, has certifications in hormone and gut health, and also keeps the wheels on the bus here at Revitalize.
I try.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited about this because I learn a ton from you always, and I feel like we should share that with the world. Let's get right into this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about inflammation and stress.
Yeah.
And you've got, you're extremely knowledgeable about this, but you also have some kind of personal warnings for folks. I sure do. So let's start with what is inflammation?
Oh, that's a question I didn't know you were going to ask me. I think you can answer that better than I can.
So as I understand it, inflammation is actually a good thing. It's our body's response to stress. So if you have a cut or an injury, your body, it's its way of healing. But if that inflammation triggers always on because of stress or because of environmental toxins, et cetera, that acute inflammation then becomes chronic, and that starts to deteriorate our bodies.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like inflammation is something that's meant to protect your body, and it's good in an acute setting. But then if you mix that into modern life or driving with traffic and a high stress job, and maybe things aren't so great at home, or maybe it's just one of those stressors that can really just make it kind of the drama queen of your life that you don't need around. So I think
drama queen of your life.
It really is just like, we don't need any extra drama, but
I have a 2-year-old at home I think's the drama queen of my life.
Yeah. She should be the thumbnail for this podcast. It'll be excellent. But I think for me, and just as I've come to know inflammation, I've really thought about it in the realm of like type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, which is super, super real. But with my new learnings, I kind of think of inflammation going hand in hand with stress. And really, as I have continued studies and talked to people, because I've been here for just over 6 years, so I've seen all sorts of people. And I've also just gone through my entire 20s at Revitalize. Like life changes. Poor Dan has had to watch me basically grow up, which has probably been a scary process.
One of the best blessings of my life, in all seriousness.
I love that, but probably also traumatic, just like stress. But I think like the more that I learn about it, the more just like what everyone's saying is so true, to be able to manage that stress. And I was just telling you before, if you would have asked me a year ago, like, oh, Lauren, like you have a lot of things going on. I feel like everyone has a lot of things going on. Like I don't feel stressed. But when I like really think about it, I'm like, oh, there are probably a lot more things kind of wearing on me or might be impacting me. And that was part of kind of my health issues that I've been dealing with the past year, which I'll get to. But there's this concept that I learned called allostasis, which is just like your body's response to outside stressors. So like homeostasis keeps you normal, keeps you regular. But when there's a lot of drama queening going on around you, it really comes to how can your body cope with this? Kind of like think about it like a bucket, like the stress bucket kind of fills up, and sometimes you're able to clear it and cope with it a little bit more easily, and sometimes you're not. And sometimes if you combined all of those extra drama factors into your life on top of chronic health conditions or any sort of metabolic syndrome, it's not always, like the weight starts and all that comes. Oftentimes the weight, and we say this a lot, and I've learned this to be very, very true. It's like your weight is a symptom of all of those other life factors. And so I think there's a couple interesting things about allostasis, but before I go on.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Well,
because I'll just go.
Yeah. I was thinking of a conversation I had with a good friend, and his wife is really struggling with her weight. And so we were talking about it, and I said that exact thing. I'm like, man, this is a symptom. Like, what is going on deeper? And it's like, oh, having some marital problems, nothing outside the realm of normalcy for marriage, but having some job stress, financial stress, like all that stuff builds. And so one of my questions is, does that typically show up right away, getting thrown out of homeostasis? Or is that like, I had also read some study that like we won't see the fallout of the kind of COVID pandemic till like 3-4 years later. And I feel like we kind of feel it right now. It just feels like people are tired, they're fatigued, they're irritable. Like I'm sure the election didn't help, but
Certainly.
Does that typically show up right away, or it just kind of depends on how full your bucket is already when you're going through something?
That's a really good point. Usually it depends on how full your bucket is and how resilient you can be. And so like we talk about this all the time. At the point where when I had reflected last year, I was like, I'm not stressed, was like the immediate, it was so ironic, where like my resiliency to that stress, like I was okay until I wasn't. Like you can go on that empty gas tank until you can't.
Yeah, it's kind of like an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. So like if you're taking care of yourself through that, it helps maybe mitigate it compounding. If you're listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, I want you to know that it is not free. Well, you're watching it for free or listening to it for free, but we have a gentleman's agreement here at the Fear No Food podcast. We put a lot of work into this podcast, and all we would ask in return is that you like and subscribe on whatever podcast player that you're listening on, or if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. There's no way that I'm going to be able to check to see if you did. That's why it's the gentleman's agreement. Really appreciate if you took the moment to click that link and subscribe. I was talking with Dr. Abood about this actually, and the more that I look into it in my own research, of course, we live and breathe the nutrition stuff, and we know the impact that has on inflammation and all these other biomarkers aside from just the weight. But I feel like just our internal environment from our thoughts perspective and the stress perspective is just like, it's hard to quantify, which is probably why it's not talked about enough. But I think that almost has a bigger impact on your overall wellness and health than...
Your brain can't really tell the difference. And something else that has a lot of research behind it now is whether it's real, it's perceived, or it's imagined stress, your body is responding the same way.
Wait.
Yeah.
So whether it's an actual stress or I'm thinking it's a stress, or I just kind of perceive that it's a stress or a threat, my body's doing the same thing. It's responding the same way.
Yeah. Oh, have you ever imagined argued with people? This might be a special thing for me where I'm like, he's going to say this and then I'm going to say this.
Imaginary conversations. Yeah. I have those all the time.
And your heart rate starts to elevate a little bit. Like your body doesn't know the difference.
Yeah, it feels like I'm in a fight and I'm just like in my head.
With yourself.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's shocking.
Yeah. And that's part of the lesson that I learned. I'm a big ruminator. Like I love big problems. That's why I love health coaching so much, because I'm not like everyone's such a hot mess. I'm like, oh, you're a big problem. Let me fix you. But it's like a really interesting thing to slowly start to unravel and like start to figure out and figure out all the inputs and small things that we can tweak and change. And it's really hard to do it for yourself, which is why I feel extra grateful to work with a lot of health coaches, because I basically have infinite access to all
coaching.
Of them. And I'm like, guys, I have this piece of information. Somebody help me apply it. Which is so nice. But yeah, it's things that really drain your allostatic load are like frequent activation. So if like you're someone like me and you really enjoy thinking about things, or you try and over prepare, that frequent activation of that stress response, it's a little bit of wear and tear. It starts to get tired. That kind of impacts your resilience. But it also could be like failure to shut off the activity after it's been activated. So maybe something happened and you're really heightened from it and you can't get over it. And you're just rehashing it and you're thinking about it all over again. Like those types of things really give some wear and tear to your resiliency for your allostasis. And then sometimes after a while, I don't know if you've ever felt this too, but this is, again, reflecting back to the day where I was like, I wasn't stressed. I just wasn't responding appropriately to the stress. Like Sierra probably could have been like, I'm running off to Mexico and I'll never see you again. Yeah. And, you'll have no clinic manager. See you later. And I would have been like, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Like it just was not responding well enough because my bucket was overfilling and I wasn't addressing it at the time.
Okay, so two questions there. what are some of the like on the barometer of like my emotional health or my health, like what are some of those tells that like, hey, maybe this bucket's getting too full? And then how do you build resiliency is the second question. But what are some of those things to look out for? Because we hear this a lot where it's like, let's say I'm talking to somebody like, hey, I've regained some weight or I'm stuck. And one of my first questions is always like, are you under any outside the normal stress? And most folks are like, not more than normal. I feel like I deal with it all right. And then come to find out like they're caring for a dying, mother and they're going through a divorce and, their kids are wayward. Like all this stuff is happening all the time, but they're like, that's just normal for us.
Yeah.
So what are some of those tells? Is it,
It's a really good question. And it's something that I've been really forced to continually reflect on as I'm trying to get myself out of this hole I've gotten myself into. But really, it's a lot of symptoms of imbalanced cortisol response. And so sometimes it could be circadian rhythm disruption. So maybe the first thing you do when you open your eyes is you're going through your to-do list and all you can think about is what you're doing all that day. And that's happening the majority of the time. It's okay, if you have a busy day ahead of you once a week, something like that, like that's okay. But if you have all of those things that you just described going on, or even one that you can normally handle on your own, that's something really small that adds up over time. Same with just really feeling they call it the wired but tired before you kind of wind down and go to bed. It's you have a little too much stress response or that cortisol. It should kind of it peaks in the morning and then it slowly goes down throughout the day so you can actually wind down and sleep. If you're frequently waking up during the night, like your body's totally awake and they're like, we're ready to wake up and it's 2 or 3 in the morning. That's another symptom of inadequate response. And kind of emotionally, this is true to me. It's like you normally have really good resilience, but one tiny thing happens and for some reason, like that's it. Those are all little tells. If you're reacting a little differently than you normally do, or you're a little bit more sensitive to things that you normally are, like it's so nice to have checkpoints with yourself to say like, how am I doing? Like I can deal with it, but how long is this going to stick around for? Like, do I need to be doing something extra for myself in this time? Like knowing this isn't going to go away and a lot of other things are happening. So kind of those frequent checkpoints are really important.
Yeah, I think two for me is like I'll get really irritated. That's like one of my tells is like I'll get really irritated at the silliest things where it's like I'm frustrated that like the dishwasher wasn't loaded the right way and I'm like I dropped something and I'm letting loose like a sailor and I'm like, oh, telling my 2-year-old, you didn't hear that from daddy. Or I'm finding that like some of my like I'll be gravitating towards kind of specific foods or even more like escapist behaviors and like I don't want to like do the things I normally do in the evening. I'd rather just like watch a show and watch 4 shows. Those are like some of my tells that like, hey, how am I doing right now stress wise? So how do you build resilience rather than one option is you just fall into more of like coping mechanisms that maybe are less than healthy, or it explodes and you melt down. How do you build resilience?
Really important to make time for you to kind of rest and digest because your body needs a break from it. So I think when I'm really stressed out, the worst thing you could tell me is like, go relax. I'm like, I will just go cry on the couch. That's that's what I can do right now. Hopefully it's not always that dramatic, but I'm there. I've been there. And so really taking the time to look and say like, is there something that like I can just look forward to? Is there somewhere another sense of joy in my life that I can figure out? Like for me, during Halloween, I kind of started to feel a little bit of like that stress response. And I was like, there's not a lot I can do about this stuff right now. Like I know I'll get through it. And every single day I was really looking forward to go home to like keep rearranging my Halloween decorations. And like, that was it for me. And I don't need to do that every day. But like in the moment, I just had to find something, no matter how silly it was, to just be like, I need something to look forward to for me. Good.
Yeah. There's this concept called a rule of life. I think the Catholics probably have the dibs on it. But just this idea of like, how do you set up little rhythms throughout your day or kind of a liturgical movements throughout your day that can create this scaffolding for like good things to kind of grow up on. So whether that's, prayer or meditation or meal with friends or like just having rhythms in your day and your week that just create little like central parks amongst the busyness of the city.
Yeah. Definitely.
So what is then the impact? So we're talking about like this emotional state or this stress that we're under, whether that's imagined or real. How does that impact our health?
So long term, you can kind of translate long term stress. We know a lot. It's talked about a ton now. It's like a cortisol response, right? So I mentioned it a little bit with like the circadian rhythm getting a little bit disrupted, and that cortisol, the highs and lows, just not being where they should be for our normal kind of 24-hour-ish circadian rhythm. So that's kind of a symptom, but really it is chronic cortisol. It should be here for a good time, not a long time. So when it is there for a long time, because it does help with wound healing and it has a huge role in that inflammation, and your body should be able to go back to normal. But again, if you have sketchy allostasis, if your bucket's really full and you kind of can't clear it as well as you want, it really just gets the best of you and you get stuck in this really tough, it's a circle. Of just like higher inflammation, higher cortisol levels, your body's in a heightened level of stress. And what do you need to do when you're stressed? Traditionally, it's run away from something that might get you. So it increases the amount of available glucose in your blood so that your body can take it and run if you need to. Because again, it can't tell that this is just chronic tough life right now. It doesn't know that there's hopefully a way out of this.
Right.
And like the tough season will pass. And so it could be easier than you would think to kind of get trapped in that circle.
And so then that leads to what, like chronic illnesses? Or?
Yeah, so it could be a huge precursor for things like metabolic syndrome, because when you have higher rates of free cortisol and you're not able to clear it well, or it's chronically there, it can lead to higher waist circumference, things like higher blood pressure, insulin resistance. If you have a couple of those in a row, that's called metabolic syndrome. It's really tough for your body, and then your body says, oh, well, for some reason, I just need to keep making this person safe, and it'll keep adding on those lovely pieces of metabolic syndrome, thinking that it's making you safe. It's really not designed to be there
I
long
read
term.
somewhere there's like 92.3% of Americans have some form of metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, our of course, when we talk about food, I think that's a huge driver of some of that, but I think it's also like our emotional state, right?
Totally.
We're more depressed, we're more infertile, we're sicker than we've ever been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of sick, depressed, and infertile. No, just kidding. I was like, that was a sad joke. You got to cut that out. But I think like that really, when you think about the stress and how it all kind of adds up and really leads to chronic disease, you're like, no wonder we got that way. And it's not always what happens first. Like sometimes the chronic condition is there, but they really feed into each other. They really hurt each other, and it can get away from you faster than you realize. Because usually by the time you say, oh, maybe I'm not handling this so well. Okay, maybe it is. I'm in this stressful time for a little bit longer than I would have thought. Your body's already doing what it needs to do, or what it thinks it needs to do to protect you. So
how do we combat this? Like, is there a framework that you use or would recommend when we think about inflammation and stress? We talked about some of the like things to look forward to and kind of the rhythms of your day, but from like a holistic wellness perspective, what else?
So I think really taking a look at, you can't perfect your entire circadian rhythm. There's so many things that go into that, but really a simple one is your sleep schedule, your sleep and wake schedule. It doesn't have to look a type of way, but some sort of consistency there is really important. I hear a lot of people, and I've done this to myself, where I'm like, oh, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to do all these things, and just doing too much too fast, when in reality, like my body just needed sleep, and it was fine for me to go exercise in the afternoon. It wasn't in my head what I pictured or what I wanted, and I was stressing myself out more, making it worse, trying to make it all happen
Watching
at once.
like the people on Instagram with the perfect morning routine.
Exactly.
Being like, why am I not bulletproof like that person?
Exactly. I also think, so those are kind of like basics, but really for me, a huge one was just consistency in my eating schedule. I love to be busy. I love to focus on things, and I literally have to set alarms to remind myself to eat. Yes, I have calendar. It will buzz me. Sierra will bother me and she'll say, why haven't you eaten yet? Because that's been an area where I just had to start, because I think there's so many places you can do, or so many things that you can do to help your stress balance. That in itself was overwhelming to me. So I just had to pick 2 things that were just easy wins for me. And so far, it really is as simple as having a regular sleep-wake schedule and eating regularly, which is so crazy because it's so simple. But that's where I have to start before.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot too, where folks who come in and a lot of times on that first visit, it's almost like they're trying to convince us that's like the amount of calories I'm eating shouldn't equate to where I'm at. And it's like, this is broader than just calories in, calories out, which is why I feel like that's such a broken and oversimplified formula and outdated, frankly. And it's like, you're not eating at all during the day. Like whether because you just are so focused on something, your hunger and satiety hormones are out of whack and you just don't feel hungry, or you just get so busy that you're not eating until, or I'm intermittent fasting till 5 o'clock in the night. And then I'm, who knows what's happening then.
Certainly. Yeah. And I think it is also important to remember, like, those can be really helpful tools for you, and that might not be your forever tool. So I was also kind of in that time when I was trying to bring it back together and get some sense of normalcy in my routine, I was really holding on to my hot yoga. I love hot yoga. It usually makes me feel so good after going. But another one of my tells was I would go and I was like, I think I died in there. Like, it was just not what I was expecting. It made me feel worse. And that started to really freak me out. And I was really holding on to that. It's like, that's one of my favorite things to do. Like, I'm sad. I don't want to let that go. But I've really had to just reassess and be like, it's okay. I'll go back to that when I'm feeling better. But I need to focus on these other like low impact areas, a little bit more walking this time. And it was much harder for some reason, even though this is like what I do all day and help people change. It was harder for me to let go of things like that, of like what was almost my identity or things that normally really worked for me, and kind of put it down when there was a season of stress or when I needed something else. Yeah.
My wife, Danae, same thing, where she loved hot yoga. We've been to some hot yoga together.
We have.
Where I'm dying.
Wow.
The whole
What
time.
an experience. I forgot about that.
When your boss comes into hot yoga.
Really?
She's like, fun times.
Those are fun.
But same thing. It's like her thyroid started going wonky, and her naturopath was just like, hey, I think like that's just, while it feels good and it's a good workout, that added stress on top of all the other stress that's happening in your life, like, is taxing your adrenals, and that's now pulling on the thyroid and making the TSH go weird. And so she kind of had to hang that up for the time being, until she can, get back at that and get some things under
I know, it's just, for some reason, it's just so hard to do, because when you look at it on paper, you're like, okay, doable. But
we see that too, I think, among a lot of members, where it's like, am I allowed to work out on the program? It's like, you absolutely. However, you're under all of this psychological stress or lifestyle stress. And yes, acute stress in like the gym can actually have a very positive impact. But for some people, they're so stressed, and then you put yourself under like, I'm doing HIIT workouts 2 times a day, and I'm doing CrossFit, and you're just going too hard, that it actually causes your body just like lock down. And we're like, hey, if we want to get off this plateau, can we just like pause on killing yourself in there for a minute, or like not sitting in the sauna for an hour and a half after every workout?
Certainly. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up about Danae, because that's really hard to like just maneuver, especially when you are dealing with different doctors, and that is like a whole journey in itself to try and figure out what's going on. But they're, in terms of like hormonal chain reactions, they're all talking to each other. And so here we really like to start with the adrenals and the stress response. And why I harp on it so much is because it's kind of the base of everything. Like your hormones it's a big circle, basically. They all talk to each other. They all impact each other. And so at some point you just have to pick a spot and say, okay, I'm going to address these things to really help this spot in my hormonal balance. But, when your adrenals are stressed, like cortisol, again, it's a survival thing. Like, you need to have it if you're running from something to keep you alive, right? But like that can also steal from precursors for sex hormones. It can put your hypothalamus and pituitary into overdrive and starts understimulating your thyroid, which could also, again, go back and talk to your brain and start impacting your sex hormone balance and the precursors to things like testosterone,
PCOS progesterone. From that.
Exactly. And so I think, by the time I had gone through this was before I was actively trying to figure out my stress management because I was still under the belief that I was not stressed, which was such a lie that I told myself. You know, I had finally gone to the doctor, and for the past 10 years before that, I had kind of gone in and out of this cycle of feeling really stressed, not feeling really good. My cycles would get dysregulated. And I was told after some testing to my doctors previously, they're like, you have anxiety and you need to address that. And I was like, okay, like, I guess I have to believe you. They didn't even give me the tests that I should have had, but I didn't know any better at the time about what to advocate for. So I got really lucky finally going back to the doctor. It was a big step. I didn't want to be there because last time they told me I had anxiety, which I did. It was true. Yeah. But that wasn't the whole story. So I finally I get this blood work. And I got really lucky with my doctor. She really listened to me and immediately was like, let's go get this PCOS panel. And I was like, okay. And she comes back. She's like, certainly PCOS. Like, she was like, there's no question. This is definitely happening. I'm like, okay, so what do I do? Because you know me, obviously I was researching it beforehand, but I'm like kind of testing her, like, what do I do?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm probably the worst patient in the whole world. I'm terrible. And I was like, what do I do? And she's like, well, you know, having a baby is going to be hard. Like, I'm 29. I don't know if I want kids anytime soon. We were just talking about that the other day. But I would like to have the option. Like, you know, I want to be healthy enough to have the option. She basically said, manage it the best you can. If you want to have a baby, we probably put you on metformin. And I was like, okay. She's like, alternatively, you can do a semaglutide. I was like, okay. And she's like, do you have any questions? I was like, yeah. What else can I do? She's like, oh, you don't want to do that? And I was like, I mean, if I have to, I will. But like, what else can I do? She's like, oh my gosh, you could do so much. And I was like, when were you going to tell me that? Like, she kind of served up.
It's kind of sad that the allopathic approach is always pharma first.
Yeah.
When like, if you look at like many of the medical journals, like for interventions, it's diet, lifestyle, and that. But it's like those first two steps usually get jumped, and we just go right to what can we prescribe.
Yeah. And so the kind of confusing part for me is like when it comes to PCOS, there's not a lot that they actually do know. It's becoming more and more common, but there's kind of like three main components of it. It's like there's some sort of inflammatory component going on. There's some sort of gut dysbiosis. And I forgot what the other one is.
Yeah, look it up.
What is it?
I don't know.
It's inflammatory. Insulin resistance.
Blood sugar, yeah.
Rats.
Yeah. We came up with it. We got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So PCOS is inflammation, blood sugar, like insulin resistance, and what was the third one?
Some sort of gut dysbiosis.
Gut dysbiosis, which makes sense.
Yeah, they all kind of go hand in hand, right? Because like when you have high inflammation, there's a really clear connection about the probiotics and just the whole ecosystem in your gut, leaky gut syndrome, things like that. But I, like all my blood work, she was like, your A1C is better than mine. I'm like, it better be. This is what I do for a living. And so,
that's her assumption is because, I mean, they're calling PCOS diabetes of the ovaries for many folks because it is often very linked to insulin resistance or like high blood sugar.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. And so I asked her, I was like, well, my A1C isn't bad. So do I still, like, I know the metformin, the semaglutide, like that would be some sort of, you know, if this irregularity was coming from insulin resistance. She's like, yeah, it doesn't really appear that you are insulin resistant. I'm like, okay, so what do I do?
Yeah. So what are you doing?
What am I doing? So I actually I brought her up a couple times, probably should have introduced her, but our clinic manager, Sierra.
Yeah.
And so we've been working on, I feel so lucky working here because I can play with everything first. I'm like, this will help me and our members. Yeah. But I've tested it first, you know, it's very fun. Yep. Human tested is great. But I kind of went to her and she was just like, well, she's got years of rapport with me. And she's just like, you know, I do notice that you don't eat really at all during the day and you get really focused. I'm like, I do that, right? She's like, yep. And, you know, that's something I think is really crucial, being able to eat a certain amount of protein throughout the day. She's known that I've been a vegetarian for a really long time. And so that was a whole other element of pure psychological warfare for me, trying to add these things back in. Yeah. And so we made super baby steps and she put those notifications on my calendar. And I'm still working through that
because
regularity.
we see a lot of women come to us who have PCOS that leads to infertility. And then of course a lot of the other symptoms like just irregular periods and things like that. And we have like a cohort that we just call our revitalized babies. Because people come to us with that, they're struggling getting pregnant, and then halfway through the program, it's like boom, hey, I got to put the program on pause. I'm pregnant. We're like, yes,
it's the best.
But it's so shocking that it's like the allopathic kind of traditional Western medicine approach, which we're not saying is good or bad, but it just feels like it's one dimensional in that like, hey, let's put you on metformin, let's put you on a semaglutide, when what we can do in 20 or 40 days is going to accomplish this with whole foods and an anti-inflammatory type diet.
And then I reflected all those times that I did like a 20 or 40 day. I did that a couple times, did it a part as like our health coaching certification. And I've always thought like, why did I always feel so good on that? Yeah. Just the total, absence of inflammation and just like really good routine and like steady, stable meal times for me really made the difference. And so it's been a good 6 months that I've really just been working on like mealtime consistency, getting better quality proteins throughout the day, and starting to add back in some movements because I was so traumatized to go back to hot yoga. I was scared to try it again, but I know it's working because when I go back, I was like, oh, I feel good again. And so great. You kind of feel that allostatic load kind of rebalancing through, as other things are regulating.
One thing that comes to my mind that feels like difficult, having had sat with, I think I calculated I've sat with over like 10,000 people at this point, kind of on their first visit, is just you have a baseline of what homeostasis feels like for you. You know what normal feels like. You know what good feels like. What about somebody who's maybe their body's so, for lack of a better term, out of whack that they don't have a baseline and they're not even realize that they're in this? Like, where do we go?
Oh, that one is so hard because I've also been there, when I was going through school and through college, I had chronic migraines every day. Obviously, like I'm thinking of all these things now, like my PCOS was just crying, like, what are you doing to us? All the coffee, all the caffeine, all these things just like really out of control. And I felt so horrible that I couldn't even think about it. Like I just was like, this is my life now and I'm getting through it. And I do think that that's kind of like a survival mechanism of people that I talk to about stress, stress balance. Like not everyone wants to talk about it, and that's okay. Because sometimes you just have to get through it. Like you have no other option but to stare it down and get through it, and to talk about it or do something else doesn't feel like it'll help. And so, especially in the experience of like, what can you do for it is really just kind of mirroring sometimes. I was just like, oh, do you have those feelings a lot? Or, just getting really curious with people to see how they actually feel about it.
Which kind of goes to like, just, we talk a lot about like the importance of coaching and community, and whether that's a coaching with like, a group like us or having somebody in your corner. And I think we're just such a back porch culture. Like we drive into our garages, we want to sit on the back porch. We don't want to see our neighbors, but like, do you have...
That's definitely me.
Yeah. Well, you have your cats. But they're like, are you depressed? They probably would. You speak to your cats, don't you? But the reality is like living in community, I think has like good friendships, like can be a beautiful mirror to that stuff. It's like, hey, you feel off. You seem off.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I see people struggle with the most is sometimes when they start to come to the realization that like their community is really supporting them or not supporting them. Then it becomes a whole other thing. They're like, I don't know if I signed up for this. Like I've been going to the same girls' wine night dinner for so often. And like, this is going to impact my social life. Like, am I going to do this? Do I need new friends? I'm like, I'm not saying you need new friends, but let's grab for something else while you're there.
Maybe.
Because
if they're not your friends because you're choosing not to have 4 glasses of wine, then maybe they're not real friends.
Exactly.
I'll be honest. I felt that way when I've kind of been sober curious for a while. And then this last like 2 years, I've really only had maybe 3 or 4 alcoholic beverages. And, in a couple of days, 3 days, I'm going up to hang out with my rugby buddies that you can imagine some of our parties in college were pretty fun. And, it was like, hey, what if I'm not going to drink? Like what are they? And it's like, these are my boys. Like they don't care. And that was just really affirming that like, they don't care whether I'm drinking or not. And that was just a nice tell. And I remember my wife just being like, they're your butthead buddies. Like they don't care if you drink or not. But that is a reality. I have a good friend who he's had to change his number on his phone, and he's kind of really had to audit his relational environment to say like this, he really wrestles with alcoholism, and he's like, this is not, these are too many cues, and too many people want me to be this that I can't be anymore. But so with PCOS, so let's go back to this for a minute. This like chronic low grade inflammation can lead to PCOS. Blood sugar issues can lead to PCOS. When we think about like our revitalized wellness triangle of supplements, lifestyle, nutrition, what are like the one or two big things in those buckets that could be like starting somebody who has PCOS or has chronic inflammation and might have some of these symptoms of like, I'm looking at a list here, regular skipped menstrual cycles, oily skin, acne, thinning hair. Maybe I have PCOS. Oh my gosh. Weight gain, especially around the belly, infertility issues, fatigue, mood swings. I definitely have PCOS.
Welcome to the club. You spend too much time with me.
Or I just
everybody
need a snack,
syncs up
basically.
eventually. Yeah.
But so somebody's got that, or they think they might have that. Like, what is the protocol? Or if somebody's saying like, hey, I don't want to go to my doctor, or I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I want to be preventative with this. What would you say? I know that's rather generic, but
sure.
Where do we start?
No. So really good place to start. There's a couple areas I would go with, like for the routine or the lifestyle aspect of it first. I think about the timing of your meals. They don't have to be perfect, but think consistency. It's an extra bonus if you can get 35 grams of protein around the morning time, midday, and around dinner. Extra bonus if you're able to do that, because it's just really helpful for stable blood sugar. And it really helps you center your meals around what's most important too, because I think there are just so many good things out there to choose from. Also focusing on your fiber intake when you are eating that protein, to have it with a fat and a fiber. I think a lot of people, especially right now, it's really trendy to be like lifting and high protein, which is an awesome trend. It's really, really great. But I think we know, micronutrients really count, minerals really count. But again, just the fiber that's kind of in those leafy greens or those veggies, and the healthy fats, really important for just like a real well-rounded meal. When you sit down,
so well-rounded, anti-inflammatory type meal. So we're not loading up on pasta and rices. That's going to be that's the garnish. That's not the main
garnish.
thing.
Yeah,
got it. Okay.
Definitely. So another good rule of thumb, if you want to kind of visualize it, is like if you have PCOS and you're trying to get your diet under control and you're not sure where to start, if you look at your plate and half of it is fiber, a quarter of the plate is protein of some sort, and a quarter of the plate is some form of like carbohydrate, preferably like a lower glycemic, more whole grain, or high fiber type carbohydrate. You've done it. You're doing it. You're good. Okay. So kind of see that plate visual. In terms of, there's kind of another lifestyle component, which is body composition. So sometimes with PCOS, like you don't really feel good. Maybe there's like that stress management portion. And so if you're somebody like me, maybe you're not necessarily having struggles with insulin resistance, but it's like a lifestyle stress, like that inflammation is really kind of what's at the root of it. Putting kind of some helpful markers in place, like I have my steady meal times or a good healthy like bedtime, a sleep and wake routine. Those are pretty non-negotiable.
Movement, you said walking. Or yoga,
so healthy movement's really helpful. Your body fat is hormonally active, and so again, even if you don't have PCOS just because you're overweight, a lot of times the weight comes on after that due to insulin resistance. Can happen anytime, right? But your fat mass is hormonally active. And so if you're dealing with an inflammatory hormonal condition, you want to just minimize the drama as best you can. So if you are able to do any sort of movement that increases your muscle, really, really helpful for kind of that hormonally active fat that just sticks around and causes drama.
Are there any general supplement recommendations for somebody who's battling PCOS or kind of related things, or is it more kind of on a person-to-person typically? It
is on a person-to-person basis, but you have to think like, again, it's really helpful for something to be addressing your adrenal or stress response, so some sort of adaptogen. People with PCOS have really, good success on just helping keep the baseline low while your routine interventions are working.
Like our adaptogen RV.
Yeah, or Adrena. or calm, something like that.
Okay.
Those are all different types of adaptogens depending on like how you're feeling that you can play with. Another thing that we don't carry, but we really like to focus on is some sort of omega-3, really good for just general inflammation. It's a good idea to do anyways, but it's very nourishing for your hormones constantly. And if you can do some sort of, thing to address your blood sugar, berberine was actually the other alternative recommended to me by my physician, or inositol, which is like a really strong antioxidant that's been shown to have, in a lot of research, they've put berberine and inositol in the same kind of in a group against metformin in treatments of PCOS and kind of restoring fertility and just like cycle regularity health. Yep. And they all, they outperformed metformin by a lot.
Love it. Yeah, that just goes to show you like there are other alternatives to the semaglutide. Yeah, berberine, for those listening that aren't familiar, they call it nature's Ozempic. So it helps naturally regulate blood sugar, but also increase the GLP-1 hormone in the gut. So you can get some of the similar effects, but in a natural way that some of these medications are. Well, very cool. So this is the Fear No Food podcast. Yeah. So I've got 2 questions for you. Okay. What is like your guilty pleasure meal that you'd be embarrassed to share with the rest of the health staff here? And then what is like something that you feel like people are sleeping on as far as like food, being like, everybody says like this is yucky, but like make it this way. And I feel like you'll have a hot take on this because you're a vegetarian. And so I see you bring in some pretty good looking meals that I'm like, that's all plants. How does that taste? Good, but it looks delicious, and I've had some of it. It's good. I feel like at this point in life, could just make a full 10-course meal out of beans, any type of bean. People sleep on beans. Okay. I stand by that. The fiber. Beans get a bad rap. They do. Yeah. I feel like people don't really treat them as like the bulk of their meal, but man, beans and potatoes. If you're plant-based, you'll sustain Thanksgiving on that if you can find the sides. Well, what's the dish? Oh my! I use it in everything. I put beans in soups. It's just easy fiber. Put them on salads. So no more fearing beans. Okay. Yeah. And then what's like a guilty pleasure? I've had to really avoid gluten because of my other little celiac issue. So I actively have dreams about bean burritos from Taco Bell with like the fear no food. That might be one food I fear. Yeah. I'll never have it for as long as I live, but ever since I was little, it's the ultimate comfort food for me. Like for some reason, like my parents, this is terrible for a relationship with food, to be like, are you having a bad, we'll take you to Taco Bell. I was like, yeah, I loved it. It was my, it's like the ultimate. Yeah. That was a staple for like, my 4 years of college. Yeah. Like, me and my roommate Kenny, we would, midnight runs to Taco Bell at least 3 or 4 times a week. Yeah, but I'll tell anybody, I have no shame. It's okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm always learning from you, and this hopefully was valuable to some of the listeners and watchers. I hope so. Yeah.